I'm not going to go into No Child Left Behind because that was 2 presidents ago. But it was a substantial law, and I always joke because it's a good PR for a politician, because who's ever going to say we're going to leave 10% behind? You have to say no child left behind. But unfortunately, some kids still did get left behind. Obama came up with Every Student Succeeds Act, and he kind of tried to reduce the idea of high state testing. He eliminated adequate yearly progress, which was part of NCL, No Child Left Behind, and the rigor test-based standards of No Child Left Behind used to measure proficiency. He said kids have to should be making progress, but in Bush's No Child Left Behind, they had to if you didn't make progress, your school district could be taken over by the federal government. It allows districts to apply to use another nationally recognized assessment in high school instead of just the state assessment. So instead of just, if you couldn't pass the FCAT or the FSA, as it's called now, but you were able to get an average or above average score on the ACT or the SAT, they could, that would be fine. You didn't have to pass a state assessment test. It allowed states to set cap limits on the time students spend taking a test. It also provided funding for states to audit and streamline assessment systems and eliminate unnecessary and duplicate assessments. And then it also gave them a little bit of money and funding with the Race to the Top to improve on assessments. It created some pilot programs for state-designed assessment systems. That was all part of the Race to the Top as well, so that we could develop better testing. But it also maintained the rights of parents and guardians to opt their kids out of statewide academic assessments where state and local policies allowed them to do so. ESSA did give a lot more power back to the states, but not quite as much as what others want to do, and our new president really wants to do. A big push right now is charter schools, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. First, I want to kind of cover this Common Core state standards. The way Arne Duncan, who was the educational commissioner at the time, the way he talked about it was, if you were playing football and you had to kick a field goal, field goals are pretty much a standard thing, right? It doesn't go from 3 foot off the ground to 25 feet off the ground, depending on what state you're in. So they tried to come up with these state standards called the Common Core. They were adopted in 2010. And they really began rolling out in 2014 and 15, where states really started to adopt them. And what they really did was they picked assessments in reading and math, or literacy and math, and also school readiness standards that would be good across any state that you were in. So if you move from Michigan to Massachusetts, you would have the same standards. So it's all American students in schools working towards similar objectives, and they're very similar to the ones in Europe and Asia. Then those countries routinely scored better than we did on international assessments. And part of the focus is eliminating the substantial differences from state to state. Because even though every state had to give a test, when you went to Arkansas, there were no kids that fell below the line. But yet, when you compared their ACT and SAT scores of kids that were graduating from high school, they were far below other states where kids were not passing that standardized test. So that was a concern for a lot of people in Washington, where they said, wait a minute, each state gets to make up their own rules, and they're not all playing fair. The biggest change in the nature of the standards and assessments for the Common Core is the Common Core emphasizes writing, argumentation, reasoning, and the use of technology. And all those standards relate to English. Those ones are English language arts, and mathematics. Schools are also encouraged to focus on reading and math throughout the day and teach, like in Florida right now, and at least in Volusia County, they use social studies as well. Like they pick books and readings that teach about history in order to get at history and reading. They also have mathematics and science kind of linked, or you might do a science experiment during reading. So even though they don't have Common Core standards for science and for social studies, and those are left more up to the states, they've woven it in and out of the reading and mathematics standards. So we actually have to look at how do we use this data to inform teaching. And accountability movement is not a bad thing. It's just it's been bad the way it's been used and the way it's been just degrading teachers and schools. I always say this about if you're a lawyer, I mean, if you're a doctor and somebody comes into your waiting room, you're not expected to fix them to 100%. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a doctor. I have this problem with my hip, and I've been to like 4 different types of doctors, and nobody can figure out what's wrong with it. They don't get to lose their license or quit teaching, or their pay isn't docked because they can't figure out what's wrong with it. And if I go home and I don't do the exercises they tell me, or I don't, lose 20 pounds or whatever else that they tried to tell me, they don't lose their license or get told that they're a bad doctor because of that. However, with teachers, they'll say to the parents, your child needs to read every night, or you need to do this kind of homework. But if they don't do it, the teachers are blamed. It's not that the kid's not putting in enough effort. It's the teacher's not teaching them correctly. If a teacher misdiagnoses a child and thinks that they have a learning disability, doesn't realize that they have a learning disability, then it's the teacher's fault. So not saying that doctors can't be sued for malpractice, and teachers probably could be sued for malpractice of teaching as well, but we kind of forgive those as well. I also say if you're a lawyer too and you got a bad case coming up, you can just say, no, thank you, I'd rather not take that case. But as teachers, we have to take them all. So one of the things that they were explaining it to somebody who owned a was a big grocery store magnate, and Dr. Hines said, at Publix you get to choose if you get a bad batch of blueberries, you get to send them back and say, no, thank you, we're not going to buy these. But in public schools, we have to take the bruised and the rotten and every blueberry there is, and we got to make a pie, and it's supposed to be the best pie you ever ate. So a lot of districts are doing this thing called value-added assessments, and what they're really trying to do is pay teachers based on how well the students do. It's not in theory, it's not a bad system, because if you get like a level 1 kid, your low level kids, you get way more points if you bring them up to a level 3. So I'm just going to make these numbers up because I don't know exactly what they are. But if you get a level 1 kid and you bring them up to a level 3, you might get 20 points. That's your value added. But if you have a level 3 kid and they stay at a level 3, you might get 1 point. If you get a level 3 and they go to a level 5, you might get 10 points because they're pretty smart anyway. But if you have a level 5 kid and they drop to a level 3, you're losing points. So it's that whole idea that you get these tokens based on how you move these children up the proficiency ladder. And that's why we do these things about benchmark assessments. We want to see, it's that line of, we want to see kids meeting their benchmarks as they go along. And so we sometimes assess children 3, 5, even 8 times a year, and it's typically in reading and math, because we want to kind of make predictions about how well they're going to do. And we call this data-driven reform, and most schools are doing something called data chats, and pretty much at least once a month and every Wednesday they get together and they look at all of the data on their students, and then they try to plan their assessment based on that. And so they're looking at sub-skills, they're looking at subgroups, they're like, how are all my ELL kids doing? How are my ESE kids doing? How are my boys doing? How are my girls doing? They're looking at all of that stuff. And then they're looking for root causes in the whole program, because if all of the 5th grade girls are struggling in math, then we have to look at what are we doing in our math program that is disenfranchising these girls. And so then we also look at attendance, dropout rate, all that kind of stuff. And when we look at data-driven school reform, we determine what you want to know. You got to begin with what the problem is. You want to solve some kind of problem. Then we're going to collect that data, and then we're going to analyze the results. And hopefully we're going to do professional development around how we can make our class better. And one of the processes that they talk about in a data chat is measuring focused on student achievement. It has to be realistic, and it's got to be attainable. You're not going to take a school that's got most of their kids at a level 2 and a level 3, and they're a D school, and you're not going to bring them all up to a 90th percentile. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get them to the A. Now, could you possibly? Yeah, in a blue moon. It could happen. But is it realistic? Maybe not. Now, moving them from a level 2 to a level 3, yeah, that's realistic. Moving them from a level 2 to maybe even some of them to a level 4, that's realistic. But moving the entire class or the entire school to that highest level, more than likely there's cheating going on. So when we do that, the most important step of data-driven reform is to develop those specific strategies to identify problems. One of the schools I worked at with, I told you already, they made sure that they had a problem with their ESE population, that they were scoring low, and they made sure that every single kid in their ESE program got the accommodations that were listed on their IEP. So if a question was to be read to them, it was read to them. They could have questions read to them. They were read to them. If a kid got double time, they got double time. If a child was to be tested in a quiet, secure environment, they would find a room that it was just that child and a proctor. So they did every single one of the accommodations, and their scores did go up. So when we look at value-added assessment systems, the key issue of all assessments for accountability is dealing with the fact that schools are not equal in their student input. So we have to look at English language learners face greater difficulties in reaching their standards. So like one of the schools I work with right now has a huge emotionally and behaviorally disturbed population, and their scores have been lower lately than they had been. But their actual regular ed kids dropped down, and then they also had some changes in their gifted program, because they also have quite a few gifted classes, and those scores have dropped a little bit. So those ESE kids are really pulling down the entire school. So one solution to this problem is to for several states is to do that value-added model, where they're giving you extra points for moving the kids based on where they started out. The last thing that we're going to look at, I'm going to move this over a little bit, is there's two things, like what does our future hold? Trump, in his first education budget, is proposing really deep cuts. I'm going to try and take us over here too. Yeah, first education budget, deep public school cuts in pursuit of school choice. And if you look at the article, it says that he plans to cut $10.6 billion from federal education initiatives. This is the article from yesterday. He's going to spend about $400 million to expand charter schools and vouchers for private and religious schools, and another $1 billion to public schools to adopt choice-friendly policies, which is pretty much a voucher. Betsy DeVos said that she wants to shrink the federal role in education, and she wants to give parents more opportunities for school choice. They want everything to go back to the states. Well, we already talked a little bit about the problems with different states. Different states have different ideas about what education should be, and like if you're in Arkansas, that bar, bar was really, really set low. There's also a $9.2 billion cut to the department, and 13.6% of the spending at the Congress had already approved. Under the administration's budget cut, two of the department's largest expenditures, K-12 education and special education and Title I's to help poor kids, would remain unchanged compared to federal funding levels for the first half of 2017. However, high poverty schools are likely to receive fewer dollars because 7% of that money the states can keep in order to do school improvements. They've also cut after-school programs, $1.2 billion they cut for after-school programs, and 1.6 for kids for children of the poor. They cut after-school programs. Let me think, what else was it? Child care for parents of kids who are in college so they can finish high school. They cut that. They cut 27 million art education programs, and they've cut foreign language and then programs for like testing for international education and also for gifted education. So like I said, DeVos is real big into this whole idea of charter schools. John Oliver did a piece end of last year on charter schools, and I want to play part of it. I won't play all of it because it's like 18 minutes long, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's Charter Schools with John Oliver. If I can get it to play, I will play it. Hold on, let me see if I can get it to play.
School. If Pink Floyd had gone to one, they'd have known it's "we don't need any education." You undermined your point. Now, it's currently back to school season, and for millions, the school they'll be attending will be a charter school. The things that politicians love to praise.
I called for a doubling of our investment in charter schools.
I'm a big believer in charter schools.
About the only thing everybody agrees on.
Charter schools. Charter schools work, and they work very well.
Charter schools are so successful that almost every politician can find something good to say about them.
Yes, charter schools unite both sides of the aisle more quickly than when a wedding DJ throws on Hey Ya. Oh, look at Nana dancing. We can never let her know what this song is about. Charters are basically public schools that are taxpayer funded but privately run. And now the first ones emerged 25 years ago as places to experiment with new educational approaches, and since then they've exploded. There are now over 6,700 charter schools educating almost 3 million students, and some have celebrity backers like Puff Daddy, Andre Agassi, and even Pitbull, who helped launch Miami's Slam Academy. He was a keynote speaker at a charter school conference in 2013, and his speech has not aged well for reasons that will become painfully clear.
They told me that Bill Cosby has spoken here before, which I think is amazing. Someone that I really relate to. I also love Jell-O, you know?
Yes, that does look bad now, but to be fair, it was not commonly known at the time that Jell-O was responsible for dozens of cases of sexual assault. Turns out Jell-O is a monster. I think I'm legally okay to say that. The point is, f*** Jell-O. And look, when Pitbull has a charter school, it seems like it might be worth taking a look at them. And first, let me acknowledge, this is a controversial area. Charter proponents will point to positive news stories like this one about the KIPP Charter Schools Network.
Most KIPP students are chosen by lottery, regardless of prior academic record. Almost all meet federal poverty guidelines. And yet 82% go on to college.
I think one thing that I learned at KIPP really well is that a lot of your effort doesn't reap any success until way later in the future.
Now, honestly, any philosophy that can get those kind of results might be worth considering. In the same way that if we found out they boosted our immunity, we'd seriously consider eating koalas.
You can watch the rest of that video. I'll put it up on the little as a little tag, because you can't put the whole thing up there or else it's copyright infringement. So it is available on YouTube, and it goes on for probably another 10 minutes, but it's really good. And that is the end of chapter 14. We'll have to wait and see what the future holds for education.